Today we're actually going to completely reframe a classic story. We're not just talking about some dusty fairy tale you tell right before bedtime, but rather a universal, intricate map for human psychological maturation. We all know the basic image, right? The long golden hair, the high tower, the wicked witch. But what if there's a profoundly deeper psychological architecture at play here?
So think about this for a second. What if the villain in your absolute favorite fairy tale was actually the secret architect of the hero's success? Wild, right? It's a super provocative question, but it kind of forces us to look at antagonists, like, say, a terrifying witch, not just as these annoying roadblocks, but as the absolutely necessary engines for personal growth. Because honestly, without the witch, there is no journey. Without the tower, there's absolutely no transformation.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the shocking antiquity of this whole archetype. The idea of the maiden in the tower spans literally thousands of years. We're talking 1800 BCE with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, then the 3rd century with the Christian legend of St. Barbara, fast forward to the year 1000 with the Persian epic Shahnameh, and then 1634 with the Italian-tailed Petronella. So yeah, this isn't just some local German bedtime story. This is a massively global shared human narrative.
It's honestly amazing to see how these ancient myths so perfectly parallel the fairy tales we grew up with. Take Ishtar's descent into the underworld. She's a goddess, but she's forced to pass through these 7 gates, systematically stripped of her garments and all her power until she's completely vulnerable. Now compare that to Rapunzel. When she gets discovered, her hair, which is essentially her symbol of power and sexuality, is ruthlessly cut off and she's banished to suffer in a barren desert. Both of them are stripped down, literally and figuratively, enduring unjust suffering before this hard-won restoration. And we even see striking elements of this in a Persian epic, written way back around 1000 CE. It features Princess Rutabe, who lived in a tall tower and, get this, literally let down her long hair for the white-haired warrior Zal to climb up. This happened centuries before the Brothers Grimm even wrote a single word. The human mind has clearly been drawn to this very specific imagery for a very, very long time.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. The direct 17th century Italian ancestor of the Grimm tale, Basil's Petronella, features a way more active heroine. While locked in her tower, Petronella actually learns magic arts from the ogress who's holding her captive. And when it's time to bail, she uses those exact magical powers to orchestrate her own escape. She actively saves herself and the prince. That is a massive contrast to the much more passive, dependent Rapunzel we see in the later German versions.
And speaking of those German versions, the Brothers Grimm themselves totally altered the tale over time. Did you know the original 1812 publication actually included Rapunzel getting pregnant out of wedlock? She innocently asks why her clothes are getting too tight. But by 1857, Wilhelm Grimm completely scrubbed this to cater to more conservative audiences. He wanted to make it safe for kids. So he awkwardly replaced the whole pregnancy reveal with this innocent little slip of the tongue where Rapunzel just asks the witch why she's so much heavier to pull up than the prince. Kind of changes the whole vibe, right?
Okay, moving right along to Section 1, the witch as a necessary catalyst.
Let's dive into Carl Jung's theories of ego development. To really get this, we need to understand a concept called participation mystique. Jungian psychology argues that in our earliest years, we exist in this incredibly comfortable, undifferentiated fusion with our mother. But here's the catch. To actually grow up and develop an independent ego, that stagnant participation mystique must be violently ruptured. You simply can't stay in the nest forever if you actually want to learn how to fly.
So research actually points out that the wicked stepmother or the witch is fundamentally necessary here. Think about it. The biological mother's absence, or in Rapunzel's case, completely surrendering her child, creates this massive void. The witch steps in, not just to punish her, but to introduce real friction. In psychology, the psyche absolutely requires this kind of resistance to develop any genuine strength.
I absolutely love how researcher Arundhati Raju puts it. She is, in the deepest sense, not the enemy of the protagonist's happiness, but its architect. Dame Gothel is essentially introducing the reality principle. She represents the harshness of the real world that forces Rapunzel to eventually snap out of her naive dependence. She's literally the architect of Rapunzel's selfhood.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Tower of Maturation.
We can look at the tower not just as some depressing stone prison, but as a deeply necessary space for psychological alchemy. The journey perfectly maps out the stages of ego integration. First, you have the separation. being locked away right at the onset of puberty. Then comes the crucible, where she faces her shadow self in total isolation, dealing with that intense friction from the witch. And finally, the integration, escaping that tower, surviving the harsh wilderness, and joining the real world as a fully formed adult. Psychoanalyst Bruno Bettelheim offers this incredible perspective on all of this. He explains that projecting anger onto a wicked stepmother serves a super vital function for kids reading these stories. As he says, it prevents having to feel guilty about one's angry thoughts. It basically lets a child experience all that entirely normal, necessary frustration at their real parents' rules, but safely direct it at a fictional monster. It's like a psychological safety valve that preserves their relationship with their real parents while they grow up.
But make no mistake, this kind of growth, it is a deeply painful crucible. The story definitely doesn't sugarcoat the psychological toll of achieving true independence. Just look at the insane price they pay. Rapunzel's hair is violently cut off and she's banished to a completely barren desert to survive all by herself. The prince literally falls from the tower in despair and is blinded by thorns. They both have to endure years of painful, blind wandering before Rapunzel's tears finally restore his sight, which symbolizes this new, mature clarity.
And that leads us to Section 3, Patriarchy and Power Dynamics. Now, to make sure we're getting a well-rounded picture here, we have to impartially explore modern feminist critiques of the story. Scholar Amber L. Budd, in her paper You Are Not the Hero, argues that Rapunzel, especially that finalized Grimm version we talked about, actually enforces a strict patriarchal ideology. In this view, women are fundamentally marginalized in their own stories, forced into very specific male-defined boxes.
This perspective outlines what's known as the classic Madonna-whore dichotomy. The story essentially tells us you are either the angel, like Rapunzel, who is young, beautiful, saintly, and totally submissive to male authority, or you're the monster, like Frau Gothel, who is older, fiercely independent, holds her own power, and is therefore deemed a wicked, unnatural witch who has to be defeated.
From this critical angle, you can see how Rapunzel is systematically stripped of her autonomy. Her biological mother is depicted as incredibly weak, literally claiming she's going to die without a specific salad. Rapunzel herself, the main character, only speaks 2 lines in the entire Grimm tale. And the prince? He assumes total control of the escape plan, telling her exactly what to do. Ultimately, in this reading, Rapunzel is just a passive object passed from a female captor's authority right over to a male savior's.
So what does this all mean? We're left looking at this story through 2 very different, very powerful lenses. Is Rapunzel a cautionary tale of patriarchal imprisonment, or is it a profound map of the psychological crucible required to forge an independent soul? Ultimately, it asks you to reflect. Whether you view the tower as a societal cage or an inner chrysalis, have you integrated your own shadow to find true independence, or are you still waiting in a tower of your own making? Something to think about.